Our second presenter, Carole Collet, is as she's called herself, a creative ecologist and explorer in the field of textile innovation. Not only that, she's course director at the MA of Textile Futures and reader and deputy director of Textile Futures Research Centre at Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design in London. And she's brought a number of exciting, speculative, and very tangible designs from her current researchers and students. It's work that's just been finished, I hear, a week or two ago. And she's going to walk us through some of the research that's happening in her institution, an academic perspective, as well as a perspective which can be applied in different industries and research. Carole.
Thank you. So this is the work that I want to present to you, which represents what we do in the Textile Futures master's course at Central St. Martin's. First of all, I've got a little presentations to explain a little bit more about the ethos and the spirit and the philosophy behind what we do, how we work, and why we work this way. And then we've got 4 of our current students' work presented here, which we can go over together with Valerie. So the course is set up really to question what textiles is, what textiles can be, and we don't have a formula for that. We're very much interested in thinking about it as a skin, as a surface, as a smart material. It's an architectural solution, it's a cultural heritage. And we're very keen to look into textiles in terms of smart, sustainable, ethical, and poetics. These are the key words that drive what we do. We're driven by research and by a sense of inquiry and by really trying to explore and interrogate materials, technologies, and ideas of the future. This is a student, Elisa Strodzik, who finished 2 years ago, who simply wanted to question, can wood be a textile? So in the context of looking at future fabrication, clothes without clothes, can a textile be a wood? She was awarded several prizes with this, amongst which the Young Designer in Germany. We're looking at technology and how it influences the way we design, particularly when you have to start working with materials that move and respond, materials that are made of programmable matter. This is the work of Ellen Ng, who finished with us last year, who looked at shape memory alloys and shape memory polymers, and combined with jacquard weaving and laser-etched wood surfaces, she created architectural surfaces that moved and responded to the environment according to heat and humidity levels. We work in relation to biology. This is Marin Sawa, who graduated last year, who looked into questioning whether we could design living systems. This is what she calls algarium. They actually are proposals for a form of textile architecture using algae that will clean up the air of your home, of your space. Those algae change color the more they absorb CO2, and you can see when they turn purple, they've actually been well fed and cleaned up the air. So she's looking at developing these algariums that clean up your air, but actually are made of living organisms. We work a lot to provoke, a little bit like what Emily was saying. We provoke, we try and forecast, and we try and sort of probe what the future could be. A lot of industries come to us to try and question what we do, how could we do it. And I wanted to briefly show this. This is a project we did for Nissan last year. They wanted us to think about what could sustainable mobility be in 2080. And this is one of the projects. We look more and more, and you'll see on the work on the table, we look more and more how biology is fusing together with design. For me, the future is very much inspired and influenced by what can be done in biology and nanotechnology, and when both can be combined together. This is a proposal of a prosthesis that moves and morphs in relation to the way you record your emotions. And so it's looking at how our body can embed data in the future. We do other strange things. This is one of the projects I've started working with together with Foam in Belgium and Bart van de Poet, an artist based in Belgium, who came up with this idea of edible photovoltaics. And we started working around looking at exploring how we can design edible food that actually operate and function like a photovoltaic cell. And we did a test with some of our students. We made 100 photovoltaic cells with food produced 0.01 volts, so we need to improve on that one. But this is very much, again, looking at how we can look at future of energy. In my work, I look at synthetic biology, and I'm looking at developing and growing hybrid plants that can produce lace as opposed to fiber. And I'll show you a bit more now. This is the ethos and what sort of inspires the course. And we've got 4 students here. This is Laura, who is looking at working with 3D printing, and it's great to have freedom of creation over there, because she's looking at working with that technology, but trying to make it become closer to the body by combining it with very low-tech, traditional skills, like embroidery. So she's looking at combining 3D printed materials together with very traditional techniques. It's a fashion textiles collections. The work you're seeing here now is will be showcased in 2 weeks' time in London. So I only have some samples. I don't have the finished pieces here, but this is designed for the body. The work of Amy, the biological atelier, is this piece here, where she's also looking into the future, 2070, 2050 plus. She's looking at a traditional couture atelier that we know now, where you have a lot of people working, doing traditional embroidery, but she's looking at how we could combine that together with biological couture and looking at growing sequences, growing various elements. And this is inspired very much and informed by current development in science, medical textiles used for grafting, bioprinting, printing cells, printing living matter is now possible. So what does that mean in terms of textiles? That means we can start looking at printing living sequences, for instance. And so she's looking at using and referencing to these techniques to create a collection of biologically inspired luxury trimmings. And this is an example of the biopin, which is here. And this would be, some of you might be doing some fashion or some couture. You already probably use your pins, in a little cushion. This is a biopin that would actually grow the pins over time. And when the pins are ready, they fall off, and they actually become what you can use to graft skin. So they're biological pins. This is Priyanka. This is the cookbook here, and you're welcome to come and look through the cookbook. Priyanka wanted to look into how nanotechnology can challenge our future. And nanotechnology is a very abstract technology for most of us. It's hard to understand. It's such a small scale. So she wanted to bring it closer to us by looking at something we all know, which is a cookbook. She's also used egg, which again we all know. So these are a whole series of recipes for egg that make comments on what nanotechnology can enable us to do in the future. She's done a lot of work with probing, really looking into how you can visualize what we can't see. And I would really recommend that you come and see the book and see the recipes. The last project, Natsai, which is over there in that corner, is looking at what she calls post-humanity in the age of synthetics. This one starts to bring a lot of ethical issues. And this is a map where she's looking at trying to locate her project amongst the sort of science technology timeline, where you're looking at the age of ubiquitous computing in the 2000s. And she's now looking at the age of scarcity, and she's positioning herself in a post-scarcity era where open source digital biology is possible. So you all understand open source. What if you can now use programs like there's one called BioBrick, and can you actually program biological matter to actually change yourself? And she's looking at cosmetic issues. So what we know as tattoo and piercing now, could it become that you actually biologically engineer yourself through open source technology to change and morph your appearances? So she's proposing that you could also look at morphing in response to environmental issues. If, for instance, there's a too high UV level, you could suddenly grow more hair to protect yourself. And all of this could be done through injection, various creams. This is informed by talking to biologists and futurologists, and she's actually worked in a lab to try and understand the protocols of science to see how far it could be stretched. And she's also working developing various bacterial samples. She's currently working on developing genetic first aid kit. And that will be it for me.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. And perhaps now we could look at the samples, but I have a quick question first, which is, tangibly speaking, if the couture atelier is becoming a laboratory, how does that work in a sort of everyday perspective?
Well, this is the question we're asking, because I very much think that scientists are in a process of becoming designers, but designers need to learn about scientific protocols as well. I think the future is much more about teamwork. I don't think you can, as a designer, become a scientist or a scientist become a designer. I think you need to work together at the same stage, not one after the other, to develop interesting work. But I think that's changing the perspective of what could be a designer and how we can create and generate new ideas in the future.
I know that there is a process of unlearning that your students go through, which is that they go through a boot camp, a survival boot camp, where they're sent into the woods with nothing, and they must learn to survive. And this is the very first thing that is done at Textile Futures in order to unlearn our relationship with nature. Can you tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah, we kept it quiet for a few years, but I think now the word's gone around, so we can talk about it. One of the key aspects of our program is that we are very keen to explore sustainability and how we can make our designers become much more aware of their responsibility. So on day one, we put them in a bus and we give them bamboo, plastic, gaffer tape, and we take them to a campsite by the sea. It's in October, which is rather cold in England. They've been warned they have to have warm clothing, but they have no idea where they're going. They don't know that they'll have to build their tent and survive the night. And that's the best way to learn about the consequences of bad design. If you haven't built your tent properly, you simply don't sleep. And that's a good way to learn. But it's also a good bonding strategy when you start, so that we have roast and we have barbecue and we do all of that. But it's one way to kind of engage with learning by having fun, but also learning that if you do something wrong, there are consequences.
Sounds fantastic. Perhaps, can we look at the samples one by one, just to be able to speak to them a bit more in detail? Could we pull them out? I don't know, is there someone who can? Thank you, Alex. So this is Laura's work, and perhaps you can tell us a bit more about it.
Yeah, these are just samples because I couldn't bring all the finished work. But she looked at pseudo samples. She looked at how she could simply integrate the 3D printed samples together with textiles, whether they're folded, pleated, embroidered. And you can see those are simply a reference, different techniques that she's pursued before to explore how she could integrate it on the body.
And how do you think that traditional techniques, such as, I know you work with lace, how can they be integrated into this sort of future-forward look towards materiality?
In her project in particular?
In hers, and I know that also in your own work in BioLace, there's an interest in a kind of revival or revisiting traditional practices in textiles.
That's something we like to do. We're very much interested in looking in the future, but we don't want to forget our past. So some of the workshops we run, we, for instance, could run a traditional lace workshop, and the following week we'll run an Arduino workshop. So that's the process of unlearning. So we expose our students to very different kinds of experiences, so they don't forget about the beauty of craft and the value of making, but that they can engage with very new technologies as well. And then it's up to them to see how they want to confront them, or perhaps sometimes choose one or the other.
Do they engage with scientists the same way?
They do. I can't show it here, but actually, if anybody's interested, I have some more on the computer I can show you. But we every year run a project with scientists. We have a partnership with the Medical Research Council, and we have a project. This year we worked with synthetic biology, and we looked into, we bring scientists at the designer's table. They come and they brainstorm with our students. We did a 3-week project where we explored the meaning of synthetic biology in terms of future fabrication. And we looked into producing various animations that could stage what can be done when you start to fabricate with synthetic biology. And this was done with brainstorming conversations with scientists and a final crit again with a scientist. So there's a constant loop and a feedback. We also have students like Natsai, who's actually gone straight to work in a lab to actually experiment hands-on some of the protocols. The algarium was also, Marine went to a lab to learn about how to work with these algae, how to create a living environment for them. So we do encourage those who really want to work with scientists to actually go in the labs and work with them.
how are the aesthetics engaged in this kind of practice? Because I imagine that there's a strong scientific push for this to be ecological or to be somehow, scientifically beneficial. But is there still a concern for an aesthetic outcome?
That never leaves us. The aesthetic is always there, always has to be there. I think if we propose a future which is not desirable and not engaging on a human level, there's no point even going there. So aesthetic is there, and I think what's interesting for us is to have an iterative process between the function, the performance, and the aesthetic aspect of the work.
Wonderful. Can we briefly speak to the other works that are here?
Well, these are samples where these are what we would call probing. This is really looking at trying to propose materials that obviously don't exist yet. Both Natsai and Amy looked at 2050, 2070. And so they are trying to use today's materials to project into what could happen in the future. So these are samples of some of the skins that you could actually grow on yourself. And this actually very much brings issues of aesthetics. We had a whole debate around aesthetics. Is this desirable? Is it not desirable? If you look at some people wearing tattoos or piercing today, some people find them beautiful, some people hate them. And so it's starting to question the level of what cosmetic surgery could do and how far could you go when you create that sort of subculture of open source biohacking. And so those are different probes of the skin. You've got a pin cushion over there and various sort of trimmings, bio-trimmings that are suggested by Amy. And the cookbook, I think the best is if people come and see and look through it and actually read the recipes, because it's a bit hard at a distance. And this is a catalogue that we produce every year. This is last year. We're about to produce this year, but it's not published yet. If anybody wants one, just give me your cards and I'll send it to you.
Any questions from the audience before we continue ahead?
It's more a question on scale. Do you have students who bring this up into an architectural scale?
Actually, yeah, I'm particularly interested in textiles and architecture, and I collaborate with Sita in Denmark. And I have a PhD student who's based there who's looking at electroactive and energy harvesting materials for architecture. So scale is very much important in that case.
And the students in those projects start to collaborate with architects, or for example, to line up a little bit with your question is, of course, I'm trying to imagine how is lab organized in going into this research? I understand it's more one-to-one, so students go to scientists, they work with that, but what does it mean for the lab in general? Because I guess there's a lot of knowledge that can be disseminated later on to the next generation, with certain principles that are coming back in the practices that are evolving more or less in the lab.
You mean our lab?
Yes, specifically
yeah, we try and
your lab.
archive as much as possible the work we do so that we can showcase that to the following group of students so they know what's been achieved, therefore that they need to raise the bar a level higher so that they don't repeat what's been done. But when it comes to working with architects, again, it depends because it's a 2-year program, and the second year, the students decide what they want to do. Some will go into fashion, some will work with architects, some will work with scientists. So each of them has a particular path. We don't impose a formula on our students. It's up to them. And some of them, like Laura, works very small scale, others work very large scale.
And the validation system for the students, how does that work? Is that a kind of a classic structure that it's in, also within the school?
Yeah, it's a master's degree. It's a 2 years. They have an exam in the first year and an exam in the second year. And they end up with a master's in Textile Futures.
Are there any other questions?
I'm curious how you deal with this, this tension between work which is inspired by biology, so it's more biomimetic, versus work which are actually using biological material. And the question that Alex brought up about scale is, I think, kind of the key to that. And I'm just curious how you work with that tension.
Well, actually, you've said it very well. Biomimicry and biology are two very different things. And some students look at biomimicry and at mimicking natural principles. And some students look at biology, which is actually working with biological living matter. And they are very different kinds of projects. Biomimicry is often referenced to in a context of sustainability, but you can produce biomimicry inspired, like Velcro, for instance, is biomimicry inspired, but it's manufactured through chemicals and it's polymer based, so it's not sustainable in itself. So we make a clear distinction between the two. And I mean, this is, again, up to the students to pick up what they really want to do. We try and propose different paths, and then they choose which is most suited to them.
Carole, thank you so very much. I invite you all to come and consult the works and consult the Nano Cookbook, which is absolutely beautiful. Thank you again.